If you guys don't mind, there are a few empty spaces here, so you guys can come a little forward, especially those at the back. Just be easier in terms of. There are a few empty spaces up front.
Can we bring some chairs in? तो आप लोग भी थोड़ा सा अंदर आ जाओ. I think Sahil, why don't you get here?
No, I'll see you. It's fine.
नहीं आप इधर बैठो यार.
No one wants to take this chair.
आप आ जाओ.
This is your time.
नहीं. डायरेक्ट ऐसे 3-4 शेर ऊपर होने चाहिए.
Everyone's here?
Yeah, we are all here.
I'd love if there was a mic. Throat's messed up. Awesome. I hope everyone can hear us in the back. Just smile to, I hope you guys had a great lunch. It's usually very challenging to host a session post-lunch because people are just, recovering from that, the whole feast of things. But thank you so much for joining us today. We have a very exciting session planned ahead for the next 1.5 hours possibly. I'll just quickly delve into some of the panelists for the day today. We have Manya here, who has worked extensively in, firstly she is now the co-founder for Conservation Indica, and she's done some extensive work on conservation and community biodiversity projects. We have Tambor sir over there, who has asked me to call him Bao from here on. Bao, if I'm getting Ba. He also he's in fact the director of the Khasi project, the Khasi Hills project, as part of the RED, Khasi Hills in the RED project. And he has also extensive experience in terms of community projects, community biodiversity projects. We have Srijan here, who comes with a wealth of experience. He has a background in credit, asset management and management consulting, and now he's working in the LGTVP Philanthropy Foundation, which is a foundation that has its work across Asia and Africa. We have Preeta here, who comes with a background in impact investment and blended finance, and she's also one of our esteemed panelists for the day. And lastly, we have Siddhartha, who has some extensive research background in terms of carbon market trading, and he's also an author. So we have a very exciting list of people as part of the panels. And also I was told that the people who are attending the session are also coming from very diverse backgrounds. We have people from CSR, from government, from the private sector, and of course CSOs also. So at large, the entire hall is this whole potpourri of very interesting folks, and I hope that the next few hours, next 1 hour goes very well. To start things off, I just set a little bit of context into what are we trying to achieve in the next 1 hour. The idea is that India is growing, right? There's this entire population growth that India is experiencing. There's expansion of the GDP happening, and the energy demand of the country is soaring, right? And so there is now this demand for a transition into a low carbon future, which is sort of laid out through the Paris agreements and the subsequent COPs, where the idea is we transition into a net zero economy by 2070, right? And so that transition, it sort of demands that we shift from, in terms of renewable energy projects, their infrastructure, the installations, and that deserves a lot of capital, right? And that's why the formidable amount of capital required is something that currently we're not able to match. Now, I don't have the data in front of me, but it's only about 25% that we're able to match as of now in terms of the capital that is required in terms of climate financing. So there is this major scope in terms of how can we be innovative in terms of the financial models that we come out with in terms of climate financing. And the premise for this specific conversation would be in terms of how do we integrate community voices, how do we integrate traditional knowledge into designing specific projects, because what typically happens is that it's a very top-down approach, right? I think the plenary speaker today, Meghna, she gave this very interesting sort of like an insight in terms of how she was giving the example of the police being the beta, the state being the father, and the Dadaji being the Sarkar, right? And so, I mean the Samaj. And so, in terms of conservation projects, mostly it's the funders who are seen as in that halo effect. I'm so sorry, Shirin. Funders are seen with that halo effect, and then you have the NGOs who are the papajis, and then you have the community who are seen as the beneficiaries, typically, right? So the entire premise of community stewardship is how do we shift that needle from, say, being seen as a beneficiary into being seen as stewards of that ecosystem, because ultimately, fortunately or unfortunately, none of us are the ones who are at that particular ecosystem, right? It's the community who is doing that. They're the ones who are taking ownership. So how do we then shift the needle of financial models into integrating their voices too? And so in that process, making it a more inclusive and equitable financial model, right? So I think that's just a little bit in terms of the context of what we're trying to do here. And without further ado, I'll get the ball rolling. I think I'll start with Srijan here. Srijan, in terms of like the various models that are existing currently in terms of climate financing, if you could just probably help in boiling the ocean for us in terms of what all is there in the current landscape, and what do you see are some of the most what do you see are some of the most promising models and some limitations perhaps of these models? Yeah.
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon to all of you. And I hope I'm audible. It feels weird to speak without a mic, but apparently I am. Yeah, so when speaking of climate finance, it's quite broad, and we have a lot of different instruments, starting from philanthropic capital to equity and debt has like its various forms. Of course, we have blended finance capital. Maybe I'll just quickly touch upon each of them. First, starting with philanthropic capital. So I also work with the Philanthropic Foundation. These are a very niche set of financing that's available, and it's a small pocket, but it's very useful in funding solutions that are very high risk and early stage, because this is like complete risk capital, and many early stage solutions need this kind of capital where you don't know if there could be a revenue source in the future or if this could actually pick up. So I think that's where philanthropic capital plays a big catalytic role. Then if you move beyond philanthropy and look at, then you also have like CSR funds, which are also like very close to philanthropic capital, but I mean, they are very targeted funds and very outcome based. So they won't be able to fund, let's say, the core cost of a certain intervention or of a certain new organization that's trying to do something. So that's the limitation, but also it's a very important source of capital. Then moving to the equity side, we do have like early stage venture capital and impact investors who support early ideas, but all ideas that could be profitable in the future. And we have seen a great jump in the venture capital space in India that's particularly going to the climate space. And I think in 2022, that number was around $5 billion. Then, of course, we have the larger pool of capital, which is debt. And that debt can also be at different levels. You can have like microfinance for social enterprises, or even like individuals who are working on some climate positive solutions in rural areas. Then you can have like debt that's given to these organizations. This could be a typical debt, or you can also think of like a blended finance capital where there's a risk investor and there is a person who's willing to pay for the outcomes. And that kind of reduces the risk to the investor by a great degree. And then like if you look at the capital at maybe debt at the national level, then you have green bonds, you have concepts like blue bonds that are there to support conservation causes and other green financing investments, green finance investments, but that's at the national level. Now, all of them actually are suited only for like a certain cause. Like I mentioned, with philanthropic capital, it's best suited to support core costs of, let's say, a not-for-profit organization, or maybe even fund a very high-risk idea that could be belonging to a for-profit company. Then if you look at CSR, I think they're very well suited for programmatic funding for not-for-profit organizations, and equity, of course, at a very early stage, but it's also very important risk capital because not everything can be solved by the not-for-profit sector. And debt, of course, has its own challenges because you need to repay that debt. So either it's at the national level or the company level, or like we have seen microfinancing through a JLG model. So yeah, that's the landscape so far. And maybe I'll just stop at that.
Right. No, that's very helpful, Shirin. Thank you for like giving an overlay in terms of like different mediums through which capital can be accessed, including CSR, blended finance, debt. You had mentioned green bonds. I think I'll jump over here to you, Siddharth, in terms of like, and of course, Srijan has given the overview of what exists currently in the climate financing landscape. But what do you see are some of the barriers in terms of accessing these climate financing mediums, right? If you can just give an overview of what those barriers are currently. And I know that you've done some extensive research in terms of carbon trading.
Yeah.
So if you could also link it to that.
All right. Thank you so much. I think talking about, talking firstly at a very macro level, what I would sum it up as is it's big promises and little action, right? So if you follow some of the COPs and the other international climate negotiations and talks, you'll hear big money that is being promised for climate action, for mitigation, adaptation, and recently for the loss and damage fund. But actually what is getting really realized as actual money that has come is literally peanuts. So for example, the recent IPCC report says that climate financing has to increase at least 3 to 6 times from what it is currently to keep the global temperatures under 2 degrees centigrades, right? So that is the kind of level of gap funding that we are looking at. So I think that is the biggest barrier, that there is a lot of big promise, but very little action. So that is one thing. Second thing is so once you have the money, what do you really want to do with that money on the ground in terms of what sort of projects, right? Now here is a big challenge, because if the finance is coming through, let's say how Srijan was mentioning about equity or debt, these have its own challenges of repaying. Sometimes repaying at a market rate which can be 20%, 25%, 30%, whatever. Debt, again, depending on the structure of the debt, there are barriers and challenges. So because of this sort of a very accumulative market-oriented system of financing sometimes can lose the ability of doing projects that are really helpful for the community on the ground. Because then you have to look at the return on the investment on the project. Now, when you have to focus too much on the return on the investment, a lot of other things which cannot be monetized or which cannot be valued in the strict monetary sense completely get excluded or marginalized. Hence, that becomes a major barrier, right? So that is, I would say, is the sort of the broader barrier, right? When you look at the micro level or at the level of the projects, the barriers. So like I mentioned, one is definitely this whole thing around the rate of returns on the projects. And because climate projects essentially do not really many a times give you that return on investment. It's more about building capacities, building or rebuilding or restoring our ecosystem. Now these kind of projects cannot be that strictly understood in the monetary sense. That's the biggest. Then there is the whole issue of information asymmetry which exists while doing these sort of big climate projects, because a lot of information is highly technocratic. It is sort of, there is a lot of gatekeeping of this information. It's all these big consultants that need to fly in, do the job, give you the big figures, Excel sheets and things like that. Hence, we cannot expect ground up systems of developing good climate projects, right? Hence, communities get marginalized, and that is where that is a barrier in terms of making good projects on the ground. And then, of course, there is this whole element that within the broader climate finance talks, wherever we hear, in whatever format, be it in format of market mechanisms like carbon markets and PES, be it in format of aid or grant or philanthropy and whatever, the word community is almost non-existent, or at the most, it is a lip service. The orientation is not in that sense as of yet. Now, to give a similar example, and I'll end with that, take, for example, forest management in India, right? If you look back in the years, it was something that was believed that, you need to enclose the forest from the people, hence we'll be able to manage it, preserve it, and do things. People fought for it, and then gradually, in India, laws kept changing, and now we are, although there are mechanisms that help people again gain control over their own forests, manage them, right? However, you will see there is always the constant lingering thing around sabotaging that, and again taking it back in control, right? I think that is also true with the climate finance thing, because one, community is not there. Even when you try to bring in community wherever you can, yet the way the structures are of financing, it time and again sabotages the agency of the community in doing the project. So with that, I will sum up my
Right, right. Thank you. And I think I'll skip to you, Preeta. I think Siddhartha ended with the note of how it ends up sabotaging the entire idea of community within the larger concept of the funding landscape, right? So, and that's where the core issue is in terms of why are we not able to integrate community into these funding conversations to begin with. And so, of course, Srijan has laid down in terms of what are some of the structures that we use, but what do you think would be an innovative mechanism within the structures that he has mentioned that can perhaps incorporate the community aspect into its DNA? And I know you have some background in blended finance, and that is the whole, holy trinity of public, private, and philanthropy, perhaps all coming in together and then creating something. But again, I don't want to color your opinion, but yeah, if you could just comment over there.
Sure. So thanks for that question, first of all. I think the first thing that we need to kind of look at is, like, let's say, like, how do you start sourcing deals, right? As an impact investor or as a blended finance, as a company that works in blended finance, like, how do you source deals? What we see a lot of times is that it's a very top-down approach, right? Like, there is a SDG target that you want to achieve, or there is like Paris Agreement, like you mentioned, there are certain targets that you want to achieve, and you start sourcing deals top-down, saying that I want to achieve this, so what can I do on the ground? Do we rarely see models that are built from bottom up, saying that we have done this pilot and it has worked and it's worked for the communities and now we want to scale this up, right? So that is really lacking in the market. The second thing that I want to bring out here is the institutional mechanisms and capabilities that need to be built out, right? So there are certain legal requirements in terms of what is the institutional structure that you can finance, what is the legal structure that you can finance, and this also directly ties back to transparency and accountability, right? So how do we build transparency in the system to show that, okay, you have invested $1 and this is how much has gone back to the community, and this is how much has actually changed in the life of the community because you invested that $1, right? So that is something that we need to build out. And the second thing is accountability, right? Like, when things are going well and when the money is flowing, everyone gets accountable for the good results that are produced. But when things go bad, who is responsible in community-based systems, right? Is it the community themselves who are responsible? Is it the CSO that's working with them that's responsible? Does the risk investor or the funder take on the risk of a bad project? So that is something that also needs to be kind of worked out. The other thing I will say here is, when you want to work with communities, when you want to work on the ground, there is a certain level of technical assistance that funders need to be willing to give, right? So it is not just the returnable part of the capital, but there's also a certain level of grant and certain level of risk capital that is required in the system to build these capabilities ground up. The other thing, what we have noticed when we work with very large DFIs and things like that, is that the funding is not local, right? They look at very large ticket sizes, let's say like $10 million, $20 million, those kind of things, right? So when you are sourcing deals for that, you automatically, the community gets lost in the whole conversation. So that is one thing that definitely needs to be worked on, and the need for like small grants, like need for like very small localized capital, which can really drive change. The last one I will say here is that when we look at when impact investors typically look at underwriting deals, they have criteria like what is the additionality, who are you impacting, how are you impacting, and things like that. But rarely do you look at criteria that says what is the community buy-in for this project? Was it sourced from the community, or is it something that someone else out from outside is coming and asking this community to do, right? So what is that community buy-in, and what is the contribution from the community, right? For a large portion, like a large portion of work, for example, is done by women, right? Like, and a large portion of this work is also done in the adaptation space, not in the mitigation space. So how do you kind of put a value to that, and how do you kind of say that you are giving $1, but the community is also giving like $2 in terms of their effort, the changes that they need to make, and those kind of things. So really quantifying what the community's buy-in and what their skin in the game is, I think that also really helps change funder mindsets on why community-based projects are financeable.
Right. Thank you. And I'm going to use that concept of like large tickets, right? In the sense that why are we not perhaps giving out shorter grants, smaller grants? And I think this is where I go to you, Manya. I think Manya here has had a very unique experience in the sense of having worked with Sejivan, which is a much more larger organization, and now you founded your own organization, which is Conservation Indica, right? And like moving from a larger organization into a much more smaller, organization, are these some of the challenges that you see coming through, that in the sense that, of course, at Sejivan there are much more bigger projects that you onboard as compared to where you're starting out now? I'm assuming it would be in a much more smaller capacity, right? So if you could just...
Okay.
Yeah.
This request from the audience at the back that
We'll have to
Okay.
will have to be right.
Is this not working?
This is for
That's for the
the
TV.
camera.
Oh, this is for the TV.
Oh.
I thought... Yeah, we can use the mic.
Mics are embedded.
Okay.
Is it better now? Okay, I think at this...
Okay. Am I audible at the back? Okay. So, Sahil, your question about working with a large NGO, large grassroots NGO, and then founding my own organization and how it has been. Before going to the climate finance part of it, I'll just say the whole finance, the grant making, the grant raising, fundraising part of the NGO sector is, the whole landscape of finance is very precarious to start with. With large organization, with established organization, because of the networks, the kind of work that they have proved that they are there with the vision, and they have stayed for so long. So the philanthropies, large funding, large grants are not so difficult. But for a new organization with the political climate right now, with FCRA, you have to wait for 3 years. For CSR1 grants, you have to wait for 3 years. And with all this, it's a bit difficult for a new entity or new non-profit entity to raise funds. But with the blended finance mechanism that you're speaking of, and with other financing models, it is something that can be built for fundraising for the newer organization as well. But if I may, the climate finance is a large a group of people trying to mitigate the effects of climate change, and they're talking about carbon and they're talking about green credits. But some people or some organization with a vision, or with like myself, I work in conservation. So for a conservationist, in the first step itself, the emission should not be there. But carbon finance is doing what? We are polluting, and we will pollute, and we are saying after polluting we will make projects that will offset the emissions that you are doing. So here what has happened? Here my vision or my ideological standpoint is different, but the funding scenario is such that I'll give into the pressure of the funding. And I will write a project on carbon financing, and I will write a project on climate financing, because it is pushed by market. Again, everything, this whole baton of change we have given to the market, and market will write this also. Another thing that I've seen, that okay, fine, now this is my vision, I have compromised with my vision, and the funder is there, and we are pushed towards the direction of climate finance, net zero, and achieving that target. Then we will take this project and we'll go to the community, and and we will understand the needs of the community, but the solution is not by them. The solution is coming from the other end. You are translating the solution, you are translating the technology, you are equipping them, yes, you are making a community institution, yes, but did they give you the solution? No. Did you scope for the solution? Did we scope for this solution? Probably not. So what I feel is there is a lot of imposition that is there with the community, the burden of conservation, burden of land management. They are also trying to figure out the livelihoods and their day to day, and then there is an NGO coming in saying that you have to conserve, you have to protect, you have to preserve your land. This is how you manage your land. Because we cannot ask the questions to the market or the emitters, we are asking questions to the wrong people. So then there are three sets of vision you're working with. So somebody else's agenda, somebody else's needs, and somebody else's ideological standpoint, because NGOs are but the manifestation of our own ideological standpoints. That's why I want to do something different, and I am registering. And if the idea was not wealth generation, that's why it's a non-profit. And if idea is not wealth generation, then why would I give in to the pressures of market? So there are many layers to what we are trying to deal with here, and that's directly translates to the ownership and decision making and the involvement of community for the project that we try to build, because everything is moving in silos still, and the methods of financing and production is still traditional, the market is still traditional. It's just new names given to older concepts, and we are trying to figure out our way in it. So this is what is happening for us, for newer organizations.
Right.
So this is,
I think that's well put. That's a great way to put it. Newer names and same names and newer names, same concept. Right. And I think this is where also loop in you, in terms of large-scale projects, right? The Khasi Hills project was one of the biggest in terms of the entire carbon sequestration part of it. And so you started this around 25 years ago, if I'm...
No. It's about 12 years ago.
12 years ago, okay, sorry, my bad. And so, again, focusing on some of the issues that Manya has highlighted in terms of, funders coming in, and I'm sorry to say this, Srijan, this is not Srijan or LGTVV, by the way, but some funders coming in and, compromising the vision, right? So how do you go about, in such a large-scale project, navigating through, what the funder vision is versus what you wanted from the project, A, and also in terms of how do you integrate your community knowledge or solutions into the design of the larger project?
Thank you, Sahil. Thank you very much. And thanks also to the organizers who have been bringing me here. And you should know that that is a very good question. But I think I just told during the interview downstairs that India should be divided, at least when you have this kind of forum, into 4 zones actually. So Northeast should be one of them, because the way that these developers cannot penetrate or cannot just hold us tightly, because we are our land thing. The land belongs to the people. We are under the 6th schedule for Indian Constitution. That's why it seems we are very strong through community action, and that's why it's a good case study as well, because through our projects we can systematically bring the climate finance, how to mobilize these things by involving the community people through community forests and clan forests as well, even private forests, and these people become the sticks of the project. And by this, it means that everyone is being included. Besides, also we are not only taking the men, though they are the decision-making power, but also through the project we blend. We call it we blend. The Khasi Hills Community Red Plus project becomes like this because we are blending some scientific and then also local issues as well as the local scenarios where we work together with the people. We even enhance the participation of women I think you know that only men are taking part, as I said. Then 50% women are taking part as in the LWC, in the lower working committee where they make decisions, and then they also have a say through the SHGs. As we are talking through the plenary session, we said we motivate women, and we are having about 270 SHGs there. And by this, we also involve the culture. We also involving the community people. We are drawing traditional leaders. We engage the youths. Because we are doing this holistic, that's why we can do this. Because I thought it should be a right place at the right time. That everyone is looking to compromise a bit about what they will be doing. So because and we are happy to see that we are the only community-based organization through community actions we can do the Red Plus project in India the whole 12 years. If you may allow me, because I don't want to speak much on this, because you can come there with us and we can tell you more. Because we have this. In terms of securing climate finance, the world of carbon offset projects development, right from certification, validation, offset credits management, is complex and uncertain. We are on this on the project, but we know, because we talk. I tell this through experience, and also it needs you see. For a successful community-based like a climate finance project requires multiple partnership, as we said. You see, we have the certifier or the standards, like we follow the Plan Vivo standard. But there are so many standards as well. But we have to also, it involves right from the certifiers, verification bodies, registries, the ISS market, I may say, and the brokers. We have to involve in them. You see, and it's a costly affair. In every part you do, you have to pay money. Because my head is spinning. Since I start my journey here, till today, I become clear about what we have been suppressed, though we are doing a project. So that means we need to get more. Not mean getting more, I mean to say is that to be recognized properly about the hardships and the work that the people have to do, because they have to at least left out something doing the other thing. But the thing is that why we are successful also is that we are trying our best so that there should be the mitigating measures should be in the bottom-up planning kind of thing, that the people by themselves, they should realize what to do and what not to do. So this was the thing. So this is what we found.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, I think, again, there's a lot of focus on bringing that community aspect into funding, and Srijan and LGTBP in general is one of those few philanthropy organizations out there which are having a specific focus also on conservation and restoration projects. So my background also is that I work with this organization called ClimateAction. We're housed in Dasra, which is a strategic philanthropy firm. And we have done, we do a little bit of data collection around philanthropy actions in India. So there's the larger philanthropy pie, and much of the money ends up going into projects in health, livelihood, education, where the matrices are more easier to show that, if you've invested a certain amount of money, say in a year or so, there is a certain improvement, right? But whereas when it comes to restoration projects, which take years, if not decades, to show some sort of an improvement, 5 years, 10 years, so on and so forth, it becomes very hard to convince a potential funder of, please invest in me, give me your money, right? So in that sense, I think LGTBP has been one of those rare few venture philanthropy organizations that have made an active effort to instill restoration as part of the key pillars that the organization does. And so Srijan, my question to you would be, what are some of the key matrices that LGTBP has charted out in its larger constitution where it comes to looking at restoration projects, which are some things that can help someone convert into being a restoration funder too, and it would be an effective tool for them to look into, just to look into restoration projects. Yeah.
Sure. So I think the way we developed our own strategies and why we have the venture in the name is that we were very clear that we don't want to just fund programs. We want to fund organizations and solutions, and especially fund the core costs, because these are the key things that makes a not-for-profit do much more, because then you can build your technology, invest in financial systems, etc. And that is something that will help you last long. And this is something that has been missing, that's what we felt. and we anyways always had a thought process of going in for a long-term kind of a grant. If you look at some of our grants in the past, some of our associations have been there for more than 12 years now. So we always had that patience that, okay, if we are especially working in the restoration field, we need to be patient because these things take time as compared to, let's say, health and education, which are the two other themes that we fund. So of course we have to have that patience level there with us and really look at these core costs, because like I mentioned about the entire spectrum of the funding that's available, I find these philanthropic capital can be and should play a very catalytic role where you really build a strong organization, support their team, etc. Because the kind of people that are there, they're very passionate. Like you mentioned, they're not there for wealth. That's not the reason why they're there. So you need to actually back that passion and ensure that they also have a team that's as strong as, let's say, a for-profit organization, so that they can actually go ahead in the ground and do the great work that they're doing. It shouldn't be that they should take ideas from us, take it to the community and then try to impose it on them. But it should be the other way around. We support organizations so that they can work with these local communities, try to understand the kind of traditional knowledge and practices that they have, what is their care and agency levels, build that, and then bring those solutions up and throw it to the market.
Correct.
And that is the way that we have adopted for us while supporting any kind of restoration projects or any organization that's doing restoration work. So it's focus on the core costs, have a long-term vision, and then support solutions that are bottom up. And one thing that we definitely do during our due diligence is we figure out if the local communities have really bought into the solutions and if they have a good, if they hold these organizations in very high regards. If we find that missing, then that's not an organization that we would support. So I think these are some of the key tenets that we follow to ensure that the rare capital that we have, and it's not a big amount, goes for the right purpose.
Right. Sridhar has clearly specified it's not a big amount. But yeah, Mani, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I can add, because what he's saying is actually very critical for the people working on social and ecological transformation.
Right.
Because the line items, if I can use that term, the line items are there and we can stick to it, but a lot of processes and soft work goes into mobilizing the community, making the agenda, making an institution, using legal frameworks into account, so if the institution that we have built is not gonna dissolve just when the NGO is not there, because some frameworks has given power to the Gram Sabha. It's so important that people have maintained a quorum and made that institution and given that those powers and rules and regulation to the that are working on restoration or regeneration or any conservation project. So these are some processes that are very critical, but they are never accounted in a project funding line item. Nobody talks about how many meetings a community mobilizer has to do in a village to just get one resolution. They are navigating the power imbalances, they are navigating the social imbalances, they are navigating the gender landscape. So all these takes a lot of time and some skills that a line item can never quantify. So these are some supportive frameworks that are actually required to make that passion going, to get the passion maintained in the individual working in the landscape.
Yeah, these intermediary KPIs become very important because you really can't control the final outcome, but you can at least check those numbers, which are quite important metrics.
Right. And I think it was you, Sridhar, who had mentioned about the assessing the community buy-in to a project, right? And Peter, I think it also ties into your...
You have to be a little louder.
Sorry. Sridhar had earlier mentioned about this concept of the community buy-in in terms of assessing a project. And this also ties into what Peter had mentioned earlier, which was in terms of just assessing the buy-in of the community, right? So Peter, you have done a bunch of stuff in impact investment. So is that something that you consciously do keep track of in terms of what the community buy-in is? And if yes, like how do you, as probably Sridhar and you as funders, know what the community buy-in is because, you're sitting in an AC office, say, for all reason, you're sitting in an AC office in the middle of Delhi, beautiful Janpat, but the community is somewhere in the middle of Madhya Pradesh rotting in that heat, right? So how do you keep track of like what the community buy-in would be?
So I work both on the money giving side as well as now I work more on the fundraising side for blended finance structures, right? So when you are on the funder side, right, when you work with, let's say, like a large funder, there's typically the mindset is that communities are the victims of climate change, right? Like typically you kind of just say that, oh, this thing has happened, and so yeah, like I was saying, so communities are looked at typically as like victims of climate change, right? Like you don't put any value to, for example, what is their indigenous knowledge? Are they stewards of their, like, for example, their own environment, right? Like there is a certain level of understanding from funders that needs to come which says communities know what is best for them, right? And that is like a belief, like it's a trust-based kind of giving, saying that this is like they know what is best for them and the CSOs that work with them are working in their best interest, and that, kind of needs to come in. When I work on the fundraising side, right, like for blended finance structures, for example, the first thing that we look at is this a scalable model? Like who is your customer, right? Like if your community is the customer, what problem of the community are you solving? Like why are you needed in that cycle, right? So that is something very important that we kind of look at. The other thing I think that is very important here is, like I was saying, right, so there are standards that exist, for example, in terms of like there is a certain level of women that need to be there, like you have 2x criteria, for example, that many investors look at, saying that this needs to happen, that needs to happen for community buy-in. There needs to be a certain level of women, there needs to be a certain level of diversity, all of that. But the burden of adhering to these standards again comes back to the community or comes back to the CSO, right, which is like not the right thing. So like I said, there is a lot of work that needs to be done on capacity building. Second one is building of the models like that are tested, that are viable and can be adapted to local context, not very rigid modeling, right? And the third one is doing the technical assistance, doing the work, right, doing the work that needs to get done in terms of building capacities of CSOs, of community organizations, of all of those in kind of accessing this type of capital. The last one point that I want to point out in response to what Srijan said was also there are certain types of capital in the market which serve as catalytic capital, right? But that also means that after a point there needs to be a business model. You need to look at the fact what is the path to sustainability here, right? And for a lot of the, like all of the projects I would say that we work on, without community buy-in there is no path to sustainability, right? So how do you also take that into consideration when you're looking at what is the business model, what is your path to sustainability, what is your path to acquiring new communities, how do you scale up this model? So all of these things, when you look at it in silos, they all come back again to what is your community buy-in into this project.
Right.
So yeah.
Thank you for that, Peter. And I think for the past 5 to 10 minutes of discussion that's happening around here, community knowledge, community voice, community buy-in is something that's corely echoed through the panel. And I'll just loop in here, Siddhartha, you here, before I open it up to the audience, who I hope are also enjoying and are not feeling sleepy, especially at the back. I hope you guys can hear us. Is that, like in terms of again, moving back into the carbon credit market, right? Mm-hmm. Again, community being core to what we want to achieve, how do we sort of make the carbon credit market in general, more community friendly in terms of being more accepting of certain norms which might not agree with the markets, what the market has, because the market is a strong force, right? Yeah. The community is not often perceived cognitively as a strong force. So how do you make the market then more friendly towards accepting these certain norms of the community?
No, thank you so much, Sahil, for the question. I think I'll be borrowing a little bit from what everyone has been saying on this question. So I would begin with the question is, why climate finance of any sort? Or why carbon markets in the first place, right? They exist because, not just because climate change is something which is now a big problem that we need to solve for, but when we understand or try to figure out the channels through which finance comes and moves, we understand that it is actually somebody's need to finance, right? There is a need somebody has, right? So, for example, with market-based mechanisms like carbon markets, the voluntary carbon markets, and so on and so forth, it is the need of the industrial global north. They need it, right? Because a lot of times they either do not want to do the cleanup that they need to do. There is a lot of historical burden that is there of past emissions that has actually created that status for the global north, right? And also there is this guilt, and also the fact that the way economies and markets have evolved post 1970s, the whole neoliberal wave, and which is still alive very much and kicking, right? So this is what we need to keep in the back of our heads of climate finance, climate financing channels, right? Now here in this backdrop and in this canvas, we need to put in community, right? So the way I'll see it, particularly in the context of carbon markets, because here you are producing a commodity, right? A commodity which is a carbon offset, which represents something which is an environmental good, correct? Hence, if there is a commodity, that means there is a producer of a commodity, right? The question is, who is the producer of the commodity? It's the community, right? It's the communities in Meghalaya who are conserving the forest, creating, restoring new forests, right? It is the farmer in India who is trying to do, let's say, regenerative or sustainable agriculture, right? Or it's the communities in Banni who are trying to get rid of prosopis. You know, these are the real producers of this commodity called carbon offset. Hence, my belief is that the producer should be at the top of this value chain, which unfortunately is not the case. Right now, the producer is absolutely at the fag end of this value chain of carbon markets, correct? So that is one thing. Now, how do you bring the community to the top of this value chain so I think something that has really been untapped is the power of the sheer number that we have in terms of the community that is supposed to make, let's say, a mechanism like carbon market really effectively work. So, for example, in smallholder countries where we have smallholder farmers like India, if you were to do a farming project, a sustainable farming project, you need a minimum to just start the project. You need a minimum of at least 15,000 farmers, if not more. Now that's a big number, and then you have to make these projects big enough so that they really create that many carbon credits and so on and so forth. Hence, we have the numbers. These numbers can be unionized in some sense with the help of CSOs, with the help of well-meaning funders and philanthropists, so that they can bargain strongly against the hegemonic market, right? That is the first step. We need that collectivization in some forms so that bargaining happens, right? Right now, at the negotiation table, the community is not sitting there, right? When take a typical carbon market project, who knows how many carbon credits were sold, and to whom, and at what price? Nobody knows, right? The community which is a part of the project doesn't know who their buyer was or what price. All these information needs to be made transparent. Now, how do you make it transparent? Obviously, the market players will not want it, right? They are definitely not going to want it. Hence, this unionization that will happen, this collectivization, they will force in their negotiating deals the need for transparency, the need for accountability. Now, right now, if a carbon project goes wrong in India, let's say community got cheated, there is no legal consequence for that. If a project, let's say you go in for a typical plantation project, now the species that you plant is maybe turns out to be invasive or is not something that the community wants. Was there an EIA done? No. Was there an SIA done? No. So these are the things, these checks and balances will have to be brought, and that has to work hand in hand with the community and the CSOs that are with them on the grassroots, right? We have to create this sort of maybe, I don't have a word, but maybe communities of carbon, I would say, at least in the context of carbon markets, if I'm talking, that this is what we need to collect it. Once this collectivization is done, and once we have some processes in play, once we have, so for example, if you take in carbon markets, all the big market players have their own standards, right? So there are sustainability standards, integrity standards by certain registries, and so on and so on. But these are all business side standards. Do we have community principles of what a carbon project should look like? We don't have that. Correct? It is largely absent. Maybe in small pockets there are some negotiations happening. But we need this as a standard template for each country kind of thing, that do a carbon project, right? And once we are there, the next step is because we are talking here about environment, we are talking about ecology. We can't be stuck in the carbon tunnel. We have to think broad. We have to think of ecology as a whole. How do we think of ecology? Things that can be monetized, things that can't be monetized and should not be monetized, but has to be valued in some format. Maybe not necessarily in dollars and rupees, but some format. So that these real producers of this environmental good that we need for the larger, whether we want to stay in 2 degrees, 1.5 or 3 degrees, I don't know. But for the larger environmental existence, we need to recognize who are the real producers of, because all of us sitting here, me an urban folk, I am dependent on the communities who are going to tomorrow provide these services of doing good with the environment, with changing their agriculture, taking the risk of moving from chemical to sustainable agriculture. Communities in the forest who will take the risk of conserving the forest against timber mafia or against other forms of land grabs. We need to appreciate these other things that are there, except for just that little invisible carbon that we are hell-bent on calculating, right? So we need a much broader approach, but it will all begin with collectivization. I believe that, I feel, will be the first step. I'll end with that.
Right. Well, thank you so much for that, Siddhartha. I think one very interesting point in terms of like charting out community principles, right, for carbon projects and how that can be ideally scaled in different countries as per the context. And I love the word that Siddhartha used, which is in terms of the collectivization or the unionization, right? Sort of remind me of Marx with the whole workers of the world unite concept. But yeah, I think this is where I will stop asking questions. And this is where I'd love if you guys coming from different backgrounds would just like to shoot across some ideas, some thoughts, not just in terms of questions to the panelists, but also I'm sure in your own work, there would be some things where you would realize that this could be perhaps an innovative channel of accessing climate finance. So we're open to comments, we're open to questions. But yeah, the floor is yours, the community. Okay. Sure.
I think I can speak loudly enough. My name is Blake Ratner. Thank you very much for this session. I guess I'm interested in these kind of steps to chart a path forward that might begin with this mobilization or unionization of producers of the carbon benefits. But what are the other elements that need to come into place if we're trying to chart a path for the long term? You know, you mentioned a legal structure to be able to have some accountability for who's going into arrangements around carbon credits, for example. What are the other elements that are needed to be able to have a more equitable market around carbon, and you mentioned more broadly biodiversity and other sorts of environmental credits?
Thank you so much. That's a very interesting question. I think, so one of the building blocks, very critical building blocks, is of course knowledge, right? Which is lacking. Now, we generally tend to say, and I'm not saying that it is not existing, we generally tend to say communities at the grassroots do not have the knowledge, hence we need to do capacity building at the ground, right? About, let's say, for example, carbon market. And that's true, yes. However, I think it's equally important to have knowledge building at the level of the market players, be it the ESG professionals who are going to build net zero plans and things and think where the carbon credit should be bought from. It should be to the investors. It should be to the brokers of the market. It should be to the project developers of carbon projects. They need the knowledge of what our community needs. What is, let's say, agricultural transition really look like? Because as a project developer, for example, they would look for how much carbon is sequestered because of one change in an agricultural practice. For instance, they might say, okay, go for mulching because mulching is going to add some carbon into your soil, for instance. But the reality of doing mulching for a smallholder farmer in India is very different. Right now, these days, people are really crazy for biochar. Everybody wants to make biochar projects because, it has a value of about $150. How many times do we think of what are the multi-purpose uses of biomass in rural India? What all could be done? And how much biochar will we even create? And I don't know where are we going to dump and which fields and what. So that sort of sensitization, knowledge building, as much as we would need to do about the market at the grassroots, but I think much more importantly at the upper level, the level which is going to buy, needs much more knowledge, information, capacity building in that sense about what the community needs, what the rural needs are. Then I think there is a lot more need alongside while you are building institutions, the government is capacitating itself, this legal structures and things like that. I think there is a need of cross-cutting conversations in the market. Right now, the market is in some sort of bubbles, So, for example, like a simple thing, if today I want to know what is the price of carbon credit, it's not merely a question of opacity. Yes, the market is opaque, but it is in some sort of vacuums, right? The different players of this entire value chain are not talking to each other, right? And we need to create that. We need that they talk to each other instead of necessarily looking at each other as an antagonists of one another, but rather co-create a market. Because right now, co-creation of market is not happening. It is just some structure that was laid out and we are just, so for example, when in 2009, I first time wrote my book on the critiques of carbon markets, whatever was written was literally after almost close to 15 years, Down to Earth published a recent report called Discrediting Carbon Markets, where it was the same criticisms. So my thing is that means the market hasn't changed one bit in more than a decade. So the co-evolution is not really happening. The market has stagnated somewhere. So we need to do that. So I think these are some of the steps that I think off the hat at the moment. I'm sure once maybe there could be a separate session on that, building a roadmap, and where everybody can pitch in and bring in their expertise. But yeah, these are some of the things that I think of.
I think I just want to add one point to what you said, Siddharth, which is that the government can also play a big role here, right? Like that is something I don't think we've addressed so far here, is that how do you kind of institutionalize this at the government level, right? How do you create regulations? How do you create like roadmaps? How do you say that if you want to do a carbon project with tribal communities, you have to follow these 4 things, right? Like really institutionalizing that with the government, I think that is like the final step in making this like a standard operating procedure across various locations. Yeah, so I think that's something. Like, for example, the way that CSR came in, right? Like, that really changed the funding landscape in India. So how do you kind of institutionalize it at the government level also to keep it, like, that's the path to sustainability.
Right. But just adding on here, like, I mean, CSR came and of course it's changed the whole landscape, but then now we're talking about small nitty-gritties within CSR that we're not agreeing with, right?
Right.
So with everything that we think that would be the panacea or the silver bullet, there's going to be some loophole here or there that we'll start.
It's a process, right?
Life,
like you put something out, you get feedback, you change it. So it's a whole process, I mean. But I think that's like a key player we cannot ignore in this ecosystem.
Just sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Please. Also, please, can you just introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Anshul. 2 pieces. Well, I work in the bioregions. closely working on natural resources, conservation, etc. Two pieces. First, especially in the South Asian or Indian context, this is one very critical piece of capital which goes in, which we often do not talk about in these kind of forums, which is generated from the community itself. And it's not, I'm not talking about the in-kind capital, right? I'm talking about the things like, the done, or the apparently the religious, infusion in the processes. Are there any experiences in this discourse on some experiments around leveraging those, channelizing those, because the carbon markets as such are essentially, we are essentially dependent on somebody we don't know, right? And they are so volatile, as you said, it's not in. So that's one thing. Are there any experiences? Has anybody thought about those? Because it's there. It's huge. But has there been any evaluation, assessment, strategies for that? The second piece is you talked about the opacity or the lack of knowledge. Are there people like Dasras? Are they doing any pathways? Are there things where, of course, there's a huge need base, there is a huge community base, and then there is a market which is, end of the day, even if it is volatile, it is growing. But what are those instruments, and how could those dialogues could be deep? So is there any formalized structure? Like we have seen the social stock exchange. Are there parallels like that? So if you could just talk about these two.
I don't have much experience with the religious daan part of it, so I don't think I have anything to add over there.
His question was, I didn't get the first part of his question.
I think there is a little ambiguity in terms of understanding the question.
Okay.
The first part of it.
So you see, those who work on the ground, on the grassroots, would appreciate that there is a huge money which goes in conservation by the community itself, right?
Yes.
And that often gets unaccounted for, right? What do we know about that money? What are the strategies to leverage that money? There are people. Swapniji could talk about, literally millions which would, through her organization, by the community, would have gone into water commons conservation or rejuvenation, right? There are so many people. But how do we look at that capital? How do we strategize that capital? Is what I'm trying to understand. And have there been some experiences, around looking at that capital?
It's more of a market-related question, as if we have seen the traditional practices of conserving the commons in some market angle or not. From my experience in working in the Kutch, I actually know a lot of water conservation methodologies that the arid communities have adapted over the years, one of which is Verida system, in which the subsurface wells are made and it's stacked with wood, and then they filter out the water and they use all the members of the community come in and they do the labor work and they utilize the commons. It's a common water resource.
I have one thing
But
to add on the first question. I have one thing to add on the first question.
A profitable strategy in the market is something that I don't think we have looked the traditional practices as a profit-making entity as of now. We were actually discussing the same thing when we worked in Kutch in the Bunny grasslands on biochar making from the Prosopis juliflora. It is an invasive species, and we traded carbon credits in the market. So there was an accepted technology, artisanal method that was imposed by the Carbon Standard International Registry itself. However, in Bunny itself, the Vadakoli community, the forest dwelling community of the Bunny, they make earth mound structures and they make charcoal out of it. It is the same thing, biochar and charcoal from Prosopis juliflora. It's the same thing, but that methodology is not registered in the CSI, the European registry. So they will not account for, even if it is a more efficient methodology, even if the conversion rate is high. Nobody has, in my knowledge, nobody has taken that traditional practice knowledge and the scientific traditional method to the registry to get registered.
Yeah.
So if that can be done, what you're suggesting, then nothing like it. Because trust me, I think we have all the solutions in practice by the communities living in the ecosystem, rather bringing technologies and technocratic solutions from the outside.
No, I just have a quick comment to that. I think that's a great idea that you have just given, because that could be leveraged. Like I said, we don't know how much it is, but that could be leveraged as some sort of catalytic or sort of risk mitigating capital when we apply for or think of these kind of projects where the community thinks of building. So that's a great idea. I think we'll think about that. Thank you.
I have one,
Risk could also be quite low in such cases if you are doing it on basis of some community
Yeah.
ideas rather than taking
Yeah.
some other ideas and imposing on them. So maybe some calculations could be done to show the lower boundaries.
Yeah, so I have one point to add on this, which is that there are a few emerging, I would say, instruments or things that are kind of giving incentives to communities for their, the work that they do in this. The first one is, of course, payment for ecosystem services, right? This is a place where you can kind of incentivize certain practices that communities are already doing outside of carbon markets, right? This is something that philanthropists can do, this is something that CSRs can do, this is something that is like more, I would say, a little bit more democratic in that. The second thing is that when we apply for funding as a not-for-profit, a lot of funders look for co-funding, right? So when we talk about co-funding, we also say this is your community's contribution. That is a co-funding, right? They might not put it in kind, but they are doing the effort and they're doing what needs to get done. So I think that's the second thing. So yeah, those are the two things that I just wanted to,
Awesome, thank you. One last question I'm getting a lot of stinky eyes from the organizing community. So yeah, thank you. And if you can just introduce yourself also.
So my name is Onring Langhu. I'm from Tata Institute of Social Science. So my question here is, right now in Northeast there's a latest discussion debate on palm oil plantation.
Yes.
So it's going to impact the whole region climate-wise and environmental-wise. So my question is there any climate financing to prevent such funding on the larger oil plantation before? So I mean, or do we need to wait for the environment to be degraded so that funding will come? What are the mechanisms where we can look at this?
Yeah, I think he would want to add to that.
The question is, is there climate financing to prevent funding?
You see, Northeast, it means that if the institution themselves, the traditional institutions themselves, they want to do away with, they can. Otherwise, no, there is no way.
Probably climate finance has funded those palm oil in the first place. So we don't know.
Mizoram, and the impact is, huge.
But the state Meghalaya, even in Northeast also, we have different issues. In Meghalaya, they have already say no.
Yeah.
So say no. So it is the traditional institution should have a voice to voice the government, and the government should say no. Otherwise, you have to agitate. You see, this is a easiest way.
So can I comment there once?
Sure.
Yeah. So on that, what I observed regarding that palm oil plantation in that. So instead of focusing on Northeast, which is like the last saving tree, the bottom dollar, instead of that, why can't we focus that to the Western Thar Desert? And that make that green. If we look at Israel, it's doing quite so well.
Can you speak loudly?
Yeah, so if we could focus the shift the focus from Northeast to say in the Rajasthan, the desert area, where we could preserve and conserve the things that is green into Northeast right now, but convert the desert into green. We by following the study, if we look at Israel is doing quite well in desertification. So here now the question is, if the UNTP is coming under Paris Agreement and all this, now whether we actually have the voice or whether we actually are looking for something that we could do something actually good. Also, the policy as well. So 2% true. Otherwise, it's going to, certain certain objectives will be achieved, but it will come with a lot of collateral damages. So how to manage? So as India now, as policymakers, we need another layer to tackle on this.
Yes.
Sure.
See, what he said about community organizing and fighting the battle legally is the only option in these situations.
Right.
We are suggesting over Rajasthan. Most of the Rajasthan and the commons and the arid regions of Gujarat are now converted into another kind of farm. Windmills are there. So there are also communities agitating over something else, and they have to go to the court itself. If these are not the solution, then nothing can save us from the green technology itself and trees of palm. So
No, I think as they say, educate and agitate is the only tool that you have, and you have to understand the ecosystem and ecological context. So palm oil probably even in arid region like Rajasthan and Gujarat will be disastrous because that's supposed to be either a grassland or supposed to be arid. Yeah.
Right. I think just one last closing question to each panelist. Everyone has 30 seconds because I think we've gone way beyond our time. Starting with Srijan, you and Preeta, in terms of what can the ecosystem at large, including all of these stakeholders that you see in front of you, do to sort of bring funders together in taking up more restoration-led projects or just expanding the scope of climate innovative solutions? 30 seconds. I think we'll start with you, Preeta.
So if you want to bring in more funders, I think the first one is like have models that you can show and demonstrate that this is it. Have clear transparency, accountability, have clear metrics which you can show, because only what you measure is what is monetized. That is the fact. If you measure carbon gets monetized. So really set up those things. The fourth one is it always helps to have anchor funders who are like very well known in the space, and you have funders championing for your cause, which somehow in the market hits different than a CBO or a CSO going for the same cause, right? So I think these are things that you can do for more participation in this. And the fifth one is look at like innovative structures. For example, can CSR be used in a blended finance structure, right? So look at legal and new pathways, for example, a social stock exchange, or like repurposing CSR funds in a different way. So look at existing source of funding which can be repurposed to kind of bring in more capital.
Awesome. 30 seconds. 25 seconds.
So I think she did a great job of covering most of the points, but I think I'll just add that when we look at the entire continuum of solution, we should just see, which kind of financier funder fits very well with that part of the solution, and we tailor-made that to those particular solutions. Like your pitch to a philanthropic capital versus a CSR versus an equity investor will all be different, and it all should be pitched for like different solutions. And I think, like she mentioned, we should actually showcase some exemplar models and talk more about it, and actually increase the kind of conversation that we are having and bring in more people on board. Besides just the usual suspects who are always there during these conferences. So I think that will do a great job of getting more people in it and telling them why should they do it.
Right. Awesome. Thank you so much for spending your time also. Manya and Bao, quick to you, 30 seconds again. Like, what is something, again, from the ecosystem people present here, in terms of moving the needle of funder vision being one thing and the organization's vision being another? How do you see like navigating between that space?
Me first.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So it's when we are talking about this. We have to mobilize both the parties. That mean the community, as well as the funders. That mean they should be interface. They should sit together because we are doing the same cause. We are saving our planet. Why do we think that we are above and we are below? We should be having the interface. That's the only thing.
So a common agenda, like you said, is definitely one should work towards. And another is evaluating the community perception itself. We have been talking about community a lot, but we are not seeing under community also there are so many layers, and then societal, hierarchical, gender, everything. So if through assessment of community perceptions of externally motivated funds or people coming into their landscape and working with them and how, and their trust and their apprehension their apprehension towards why this is happening. All this needs to be accounted for a greater ownership of the community, and this is something should be inbuilt into the project, that studying the community perceptions.
Right.
It's important for the CSOs to understand that also, because even CSOs they have this habit of taking things for granted when you're working in a landscape for a longer period of time. The redundancy comes, creativity gets lost, and if youth of the communities and their voice, it's always about the elders. What about the youth, and what do they want to do? It's not necessary that every traditional practice has to continue. So everything has to happen ground up.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you, Manya. And I think the last question of the session would be to Siddhartha. You already mentioned some innovative ideas in terms of unionization and also creating certain projects which can be giving that bargaining power to the community. But again, point being, like, in terms of the ecosystem of players that exist, how can all of us come together to sort of achieve this end goal of the solutions that you already had mentioned?
It's difficult. I mean, there is no 30-second answer for it, but I can say that we'll need a table like this, get all the players, and we start talking project-wise. End of story, step-wise. Yeah. So I'll just close
that was less than 30
Thank
seconds.
you.
But awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining.
Just one moment, Sahil.
Sure.
We'll just facilitate the panelists with a token of appreciation, and I call upon Mr. Blake from CORE for doing that.
Let's give a warm thank you to the panel. Any order?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to talk after.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you separate, it helps. Here's the biggest challenge. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
I think we can stand there for one photograph.
All right.
Thank you so much, Blake.
Thank you.
You can stand together and sure.
I'm right down on you.
Sure.
Shall we move this chair out so that you can fit in?
Please come in.
Please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.